how that works. All right, so here are the questions, and happy to go over any of them.
First one. Oh yeah, right. Connection.
Should be called default connection. Now, what we've done so far, your app would still work if you called your connection string something else. If you called it my connection, it's going to work. The problem is it's going to break when we start adding the stuff we're doing today. So when we set up our project to use the ASP.NET Identity libraries for authentication, those libraries look for a connection string called default connection. So they'll automatically do a lot of stuff for us, but if we call that connection string anything other than default connection, a lot of that stuff doesn't work. So we're best to keep this Pascal case name of default connection.
I'm a bit curious about one of the questions.
All right, well, now's your chance to ask. Which one?
Microsoft enterprise level database management.
SQL Server.
SQL Server.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, come on, SQL Server.
It's technically Microsoft SQL.
Wait, yeah.
Like the actual trademark name
Come
is
on.
SQL Server.
Give me a
Second question?
yeah, second question.
None of the answers are case sensitive.
There's also the identity one.
Okay, hang on. All right, so hang on. So Entity Framework is the data access library. So Entity Framework is the tool that allows us to scaffold the database connection class and the models from an existing database, or it allows us to do the reverse. We can have an empty database. We could define a bunch of model classes and then use Entity Framework to reverse engineer our database tables.
Automatically assign ID values. What? Oh, maybe I got that one right then. Was it case sensitive? It was
No, none. Okay, I'll say it again for the third time. None of the answers on the quiz are case sensitive. As long as you put in the right characters, it ignores the casing. The next person who asks if they're case sensitive gets a 0 on today's quiz.
Oh, it's just being case sensitive.
Was this the monthly assigned value?
Oh, okay. I got that one wrong because I was an idiot and didn't read the question.
Okay, so I'm asking, where do we want to create that class when we use the scaffold command? So this should go inside of our models folder is the appropriate place to put it, because the database connection class gets created there as well as all of the other models. That's why in that command we have a flag of, I think it's minus output dir, and we said models. If we don't specify, it just creates all the stuff in the root of the project, and it should go in the models namespace. Yeah, for each. So that'll let us iterate over a collection. Next, no, the midterm's not for 2 weeks. One more, yeah, one more. Yes. Yes.
Next week?
No, 2 weeks. This is week 5.
I don't know why.
Can't seem to find the other one that I got. Database is stored in app settings.json. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
It's in the app settings JSON file.
You're wrong. I don't know what the second one is.
I know what the two I got.
First one was the default connection.
Yep.
And that, yeah, that SQL server one. Yeah, I got that one automatically. Database connection class created by. Yeah.
The last one is the scaffold DB context command. If you're like me, you were an idiot and put views in that model.
It will most definitely not scaffold views for you.
I, for some reason, read that as allow you to, for some reason, I read that as allow you to scaffold views automatically.
No, it's literally, so the database connection class is of type inherits from DB context. So DB context is a database connection object.
Rich, did this include just these questions or some from last week as well?
You know what? I think I messed up and neglected to grab. So this was, I meant to grab questions from the previous quiz. I think I may have forgotten to do that. So all of this stuff was actually from last week's class only.
Okay. I feel like there's questions I did that I can't see here, so whatever.
All right. Okay, so let me go back. Here we'll jump into our So what we're going to do today, we've already sort of partly set our project up. So we're going to look at using this ASP.NET Identity library. So this is a suite of packages that are designed to handle authentication and authorization. And when we set our project up, by default, when you use the template, it defaults to no authentication. When we set our solution up, we change that option to use individual user accounts. But we haven't really done anything with it yet. So we've got our app and our database. Our data access layer we've created now. We use the scaffold DB context to create that data access layer. But we're going to get into these two classes, the identity manager and then the identity store. So these things manage authentication and authorization. So for today, we'll definitely use authentication. We may or may not get into authorization. Hopefully we'll have a chance to do both. What's the difference between those two? This is a great job interview question for a junior developer, by the way. Well, what's the difference between authorization and authentication?
So isn't authentication checking whether or not someone has authorization, a user is authorized to do a certain action?
Well, which one is that? Is that authentication?
Well, hold on. So authentication is checking for authorization. Does that make sense? Authorization is the permission to do an operation.
I would say that's, I give you half marks. I'd say it's half correct. Serge? Not exactly. Tolu and then John.
For example, if a user creates a password and then you authenticate, you have to make that user with that password. And authorization is giving different levels of access within whatever web app you have. So someone with, I guess the backend developer is authorized to go in and change files as a user.
Okay. All right. We're getting very close. So authorization, yes, absolutely. Authentication, we're getting warmer.
So
We're not.
authentication is
John, you had a hand up. Authentication isn't a word. Are we talking about authentication or authorization?
I believe it's effectively making sure that with the setting was inputted, which is going to be a user in this case, that they are the right person, they are the right, that it's fulfilling the right scenarios to give that authority the permissions to what would normally be the user.
Okay. All right. That's a pretty good explanation. Brady, you want to add to it? Okay, true. Okay. Yeah, that's true. Giffen, did you have a hand? Or no?
It's gonna be similar to that. I was gonna say authentication focuses on making sure, validating you are who you are and you have an account with that database or whatever. And then authorization is like Brady said, what security level that you are granted to then access that database.
Right. Okay. So that's the key. Authentication is around identity. It's about who is this user. It's not concerned with what is this user allowed to do. It's simply, do we know who this is? This user who wants to use our application, yes or no? So authentication is the first level in security, is identifying who's asking to use the application. Authorization is the next level. Now that we know who you are, what are you allowed to do within the application? Okay. So if we think about in D2L, right, we all have to log into it. So that's the first step, is that authentication, the login screen. Who are you? Do you have a valid Lakehead credential to get in here, yes or no? But once we get in here, we can load the same resource, and then the authorization runs, because you don't have things like these drop downs, right? We're looking at the same page, but then there's logic around authorization. Who is now that we know who's logged in, what is this person allowed to do, and what options do we display, and what options do we hide? So authorization is kind of a second level. So the first level we'll implement in .NET is just simple basic authentication. An anonymous user can see and do this. Somebody with a valid account can identify themselves and they can do and see other things. That's the first level. Then the second level is, once we have that working, can we then create a couple different levels of roles and say two different users both logged in, that it would behave like D2L was. And a user in one role can see and do certain things, and a user in a different role can see and do other things, or is prevented from doing or seeing certain things. Okay, so this is kind of the model, but we'll start with the basic authentication. And the identity libraries, they're set up to manage all of this stuff for us. So what we'll get, this is kind of a simplified version. So we didn't build, and I deliberately didn't build in the script I gave you for our site, I didn't give you any tables to do with authentication or authorization at all, right? We just had basically tables to manage the inventory and catalog, and then tables for people to be able to use the cart, shop, and place orders. And the reason we didn't add these tables is ASP.NET Identity is going to kind of give them to us. So we've got 5 tables. So the ones we're primarily concerned with, the ASP.NET users table, this is obviously going to hold the user accounts. So it will do things like password hashing, that stuff will happen automatically.
When I go back, when it comes to like adding new tables or altering these existing tables, do you then have to rescaffold your full project, or would that fix the model?
Really good question. There's 2 ways you can do this. Actually, let's look on here. There's the way Microsoft recommends, and then there's the way I prefer to do it. And you can do either one. Let me just search in here for... There is a tool called migrations. So in the migrations, yeah, what happens if you make a change? So you can run through the command line, but you can change something in the model and then say update the database, and it can migrate it, or you can do the reverse.
Remove migration above there somewhere. I think, was that it? Yeah, so you can run database update. It actually creates, I'll show you in Visual Studio. So you can use migrations. I'm terrified of using migrations because my fear is, let's say I customize my model, right? We added a bunch of customizations. We added like some aliases and some other validation rules last week, like making sure our price couldn't be below 0. If I then go and change something in my table and run the migration, I don't know, I can't guarantee it's not gonna wipe out the customizations I've already made. It may preserve them, it may not. I don't really wanna find out.
So if I go, let's say I need to add a new column to my table, I'm manually going to add the column to the database and then add the new property to my model and then to wherever else I would need to do it. That's my preference. I prefer to maintain control of it that way once it's up and running, especially once my app is in production and I have real data in the database. I don't want to do anything that might recreate my database, for example, and destroy my data. So you can experiment with the migrations. I'm always very nervous to play with them.
Would this migration also change your, like, or, I guess, would it change your controllers, or would you have to just
No.
create your controllers?
You'd have to recreate your controllers and views, but again, any customizations you've made, if you recreate those are going to get wiped out.
Yeah.
So I prefer to do my scaffold initially, and then I'll just make the changes manually when I need to. If you want to play around with the migrations, absolutely, you could go ahead and see what happens.
I want to redo my assignment the way I did it. I was talking to someone today, and I thought of a way I could make my website better and all that. So it basically requires me to revamp my database, but I'd like to not have to create a new project and overwrite it.
You don't have to create a new project. You could just manually mimic whatever changes you make in the database. So if you add a new field, you could just, or if you create a new table, you could manually create the model.
And the context would be a problem.
You'd have to go into the context. So you would need to declare your new model as a DB set and model any relationships it had. So you'd have to do that part manually.
The only other question I have, to get back to it, sorry, is I know we added the login register buttons, right? By checking buttons. Like,
Yes.
Like a checkbox. If you didn't check that box, can you add it? Because I tried with, for example, my assignment as well. I tried like adding them, after the fact, like putting the files in.
Yeah,
and it didn't show up.
You can, and I think we'll look at some of the documentation today.
Okay.
And I think there's a link here on how to add identity to an existing project if you didn't put it in at the beginning.
Okay.
Much easier to set it up at the beginning, but there are some instructions in here how to do it. Okay. So what I want to do is I grabbed this script. So in .NET MVC, it used to be that the tables automatically get built for you. In Core, they've stripped this out to my annoyance, but some very nice developer was nice enough to post the script on Stack Overflow, how to create the tables that ASP.NET Identity needs. Now this script, a few things that Core was expecting, a few fields in the users table that weren't here that I've added.
Mine was complaining about that because I actually got the program itself to generate those tables in my database.
So I've taken this script. Yeah, my page doesn't want to load. I've taken this script and put it on Blackboard, and we're going to download it and run it on our lowballers database, so it will build the 5 tables that ASP.NET Identity needs. So I'll open this up. There were a few columns missing that Core wants that were not in this developer's script. So I've added them. Because this article is a little bit old. So the script is from here. Oh, sorry. I meant to post the script on D2L. I may not have done that. Just bear with me. Sorry. No, don't copy and paste it because you'll get a couple errors. Sorry. I'll upload the script you need. I thought I uploaded it, but I may not have. So I'll just upload it now. It actually says I did upload it. I'm just not sure where the link to the file is. And now my page will not scroll. Cool.
Okay, we will try this again. Oh, here's my SQL file. So here, if you just right click, I think you can download the file. So where it says ASP.NET Identity Tables SQL file, that's the file we want. You may have to click the link and then download the file from inside. So click where it says ASP.NET Identity and then download this file. So now I'm going to open up Management Studio, connect to my database, and I'll execute the script. And that'll build the 5 tables. So I'm just going to double check my app settings.json. I think I'm connected. My project's connected to my local. Yeah, I'm connected locally. So I'll just connect to my local server. And I'll just click on File and open File and browse to it. So my database right now has got the original 5 tables. 6. So before I run the script, I want to make sure I don't run this in my master database. I'm running it in my low ballers database. So I'll just change the database selection here. And now I can execute the script. It should run. So it runs quickly. And if I click on my database and click refresh, I now have my identity tables that I need. So I'm going to just open up the ASP.NET users table for a minute, because this is the primary table we're using for storing user accounts.
Double click on that?
I right clicked and I chose design.
Oh, okay.
That takes us into the table structure.
Mhm.
So every user gets a string unique identifier. It's a primary key. We've got fields for email. We can set up email confirmation if we want it so that a user's account is not active until they get an email and click it. Yep. Yeah, anybody could, you could run it. If you connect to it, you can run it. Yep. Okay. It also has hooks if we want to enable 2-factor authentication, if we want to lock users out. So it also has, notice it's got a field for password hash and a security stamp. What do you suppose the security stamp is doing? It's actually involved in the password generation. Close. Yeah, Brady, what'd you say? Yeah, it's a salt value. So this way, if we all create accounts with the exact same password, the resulting password hash will be unique for each one of us because it generates a unique key or security stamp that's a salt value that's used in the hashing algorithm. So this way, if we've got this, what are there, 14 of us in the room, we can all put in the same password, but the resulting hash value that gets stored will be unique to each one of us. So that happens automatically. Okay. We have a roles table, all this stuff. So we're not really going to use claims and logins, but we will use users, roles, and then there's a junction table, user role, which allows us to say which user is in which role or roles, right? Because a user could potentially be in multiple roles in an application. So that's why it's a junction table. It's a many-to-many relationship.
one role can have many users, one user can be in many roles. So we've got this junction table to store each of those relationships where we just have a user ID and a role ID. These 4 columns at the bottom were not in that script on Stack Overflow because those columns didn't exist in earlier versions of ASP.NET Identity. This post is from 2017. So with core, you now need those extra fields.
I'm gonna double check to see if my assignment happened because login in my assignment is broken. But I do have those tables in my data.
All right, I'm gonna try it and see. So we actually have in Visual Studio, if we look, we've got this folder we haven't looked at before called areas. And in here, there's an area for identity. And in here, we've got we do. So what I'm going to do here is click on register. I'm going to try and create an account. So we haven't written any code at all. All we did was create the tables in the back end. If I try this, right, it automatically validates that my username's an email address. So I will create an admin account. If I put in a single character, these are the default password rules. 6 characters, lowercase, uppercase, number, and special character. If we want, we can override these password rules. We can set up password rules in, we can set up password rules in our startup. Let's see, I think it's, let's go here for a minute. I'm not going to change the password rules. I'm happy with these rules, but I'll show you what it looks like. So you can override the structure of these if you want somewhere in here. Maybe it's in here. So in our startup, we can override the options for the password settings if we want. We can set up password recovery. We can set how long a login token lasts. We'll just go with the default. So I'll fill this out, finish registering. So I'll make sure I follow the password rules. We'll see if this actually works. Okay, so it says it wants an identity user, which we don't have in our DB context. Okay, let me just go back to my So this is where, so this line that we changed last week, this sets our main database connection. It says our default connection should use our low ballers context.
And then here our identity is also using the same class. So we'd have the option, if we wanted, we could store the users somewhere else. But to me, it generally makes sense to store them in the same database. So this is why we wanted to point to our connection class, both on line 39 and on line 44. May have to install, just a minute, a new get package. I want to think for a minute. I may have missed that step. Go here and browse for identity. Microsoft ASP.NET ASP.NET Core.Identity. I'm going to add this 2.2. We may need this package. I may have missed this step. So I'm going to install this and try again. I'll install it, I'll build, and I'll try my registration again. I should take my connection string out of my connection class, but I'll leave that for now. All right, let's try again. So I'll resubmit my register form. I have to admit I haven't seen this error before, so we'll see what happens. All right. Well, we didn't include an identity user, but we don't usually need to. Okay. I ran this on a test project. It seemed to work fine, so I need to figure out what I've done differently. Well, obviously, I've missed a step.
You still have a test project? And we can take a
I do. Yep. Let's open it up. We just did it yesterday. So I'll look in my context class in both. So here it's saying we don't have the identity user in here, which is true. We don't. I think I see the issue.
We may need, so our connection class is inheriting from the generic database connection object. We may need to It doesn't like that very much. Okay. So we may need to say this class is also used for ASP.NET Identity. So I change the parent class from DB context to identity DB context, and then it wanted me to add this reference on line 2. I think that should fix it because this now inherits from identity DB context. It should know what the identity user class is. I'll try one more time. So I'll just resubmit my form. And if this works, I'll put a comment in my class that we've made that change. I know we're about due for a break.
Yep, that is exactly the error I'm getting. This one? Yep.
Identity user login. Okay, well.
I generated mine from the app. And it didn't generate whatever tables I need. And it will work. It has something to do with the DB context.
Sure, yeah.
Because when you change identity, you can't just change your context to an identity DB context. There's something missing from it. You need to add in something.
Well, this one worked in my test. I inherited here.
At least that was what I was being, what a lot of the forums I was searching.
All right.
You need to add, you need to make inherit from identity DB context. They mentioned something about changing.
All right. Let's take a break. We'll sort it. We'll get it sorted out. We'll take a little pause here. We'll kick it around for a bit.
Because if I switch back to application DB context,